All right, thank you. Well, thank you, all of you, for being with me here tonight. Um, it's deep gratitude to you for taking the time out of your lives to offer companionship and sangha while I tell a story. Well, maybe even a bedtime story. So if you're all asleep at the end, maybe I'll be very happy, or maybe I won't be. Let's start with the title, Way Seeking Mind. That word way, I mean, it's there, isn't it? For us, it means path. It's there in the word highway. But really, it's one of those words that I feel is not well translated. In Chinese, it's the Tao or the Tao. And Lao Tzu explained that the Tao is not a name for a thing, but the underlying natural order of the universe. And so immediately I begin to think, well, what am I seeking here in this talk? I'm going to be talking about my way-seeking mind, but what does that really mean? Because I understand that it's not a path. It's not a way. I mean, a path, we always follow a path, don't we? Up the side of a mountain, across a field. But this is very mysterious. It's the underlying natural order of the universe. So that seems a much more esoteric, much more complex thing that we're attempting, or I'm attempting to do with my mind and the talk tonight. A sense that this could be a very long story, seeking this no way, no mind. But anyway, perhaps even so, maybe we could still walk in hand along this no path, along this no road to possibly nowhere. And we could walk it together just for an hour or less than an hour this evening. So where did it all start for me? My way-seeking mind, my way-seeking, my coming to Buddhism, as it were, to put it in more prosaic terms. Well, it must have started with the Big Bang, and that's obvious, didn't it? 14.7 billion years ago, when from a hot, dense spot, there was this ginormous mega explosion that set in motion time and space. Almost completely unimaginable. So maybe I was thinking, you know, because time didn't exist before that, according to the scientists. So maybe it could be said that we, along with all the Buddhas past and present and future, are starborn, interconnected in totally mysterious, unfathomable ways, in a boundaryless way, interconnected inextricably in this weave of space and time and particles and atoms that emanated from that Big Bang. We are starborn. We're all born of those particles that began with that measureless explosion. And perhaps that's another long story, which I ought to shorten a bit. But just talking about time, and we've talked a lot, I think, about time during the practice period, and Dogen's view on time. I just like to read a little bit from T.S. Eliot, the English poet on time, in his long poem, The Four Quartets, in which he writes about lots of things, but it's partly about his ancestors and partly about time and lots of other things, faith. But this is towards the beginning of the poem, Burnt Norton, which I think one of his ancestors had lived in, a house in Somerset, I believe. So here is what he says about time. And remember that T.S. Eliot was High Anglican, Church of England. He wasn't Buddhist. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory, down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden. My words echo thus in your mind. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. I think T.S. Eliot was a kind of modern day Dogen in his views on time, certainly. But anyway, let's come down to earth a little bit and away from time. What do I know about my ancestors? Very little, actually. But that a friend of mine did some genealogy research, another Ellesmere, a little while ago. And so I do know that there was a farmer in the 1700s, quite a well-to-do farmer, who lived just outside Shrewsbury. And he had two sons. And it would appear that these two sons did not want to be farmers. And so together they ran off to London. And apparently one of them became a tailor. Now, you know, the other night, I think it was Jean and previously Devon had talked about these mice and the way that perhaps DNA can be impressed with experiences from former lives. I got to thinking a little bit about that after hearing that, because one of the things when I was younger was I liked expensive suits. And my mum used to be a little bit appalled at the money I used to spend on suits. But actually, and I still like expensive suits today, although I don't wear one very often, I must admit. But a friend and I had discovered early in our teens that if you were smartly dressed and you could dance, it was no problem pulling girls. So that was part of my motivation for having these expensive suits. And I wondered, you know, after hearing Devon and Gina, well, I wondered if that guy working as a tailor somehow impressed on my DNA. I don't know. But the other guy was a horse thief. I don't know whether he came to a bad end or not, but I mean, I've had some adventures with horses too. Out of control horses that, despite the fact that you're on their back and you want them to go somewhere, they don't want to go. I once, on the back of a very powerful mare, completely destroyed a village cricket match with this horse galloping around on the ground and causing absolute turmoil. And another time, a load of Saudi Arabian princes galloping down the A1 outside Uxbridge in London. So lots of adventures, perhaps as a result of all those conditions under which my ancestors came to work a while ago. But my mother was Welsh. South Wales. She was born in a little village called Cwm Felinfach in the South Wales coalfields. And in the 1920s, that place was not a very nice place to be. The miners were being locked out by their employers who had been cutting their wages. Churchill sent the troops in. And although my mother didn't often talk about it, there were often many days when they went hungry. And because of things that happened, which I'll come to in a little while, I was a bit angry. Well, I was angry with her for a long time. And then after I came to Buddhism, I realized what a lovely, heroic figure she was. She had gone through so much in her young life. And had made the best of it, I think. My father was a Cockney, born within the sound of Bow Bells. And they'd met at Henley, where my dad was working for an aristocratic house as a gardener, and my mum was working in service. And yeah, I suppose I was born into a time of suffering and fear, because it was wartime. And my father, of course, was conscripted and went out and fought in North Africa and Italy and was killed. And that was a deep trauma in my life. partly because nobody took the trouble to tell me he wasn't coming back. And I mean, I've been in quite deep therapy and tried to possibly, thinking this is incredible. Somebody must have told me at some time that he was dead and he wasn't coming back. But I certainly can't remember. So I have a bit of a theory that when you lose a parent, when you're very young, there is something that there's a shadow in your life, and perhaps even a kind of intuition that's built in, that life isn't what it seems, what appears on the surface. And there, when I came to Buddhism, I found a bond with Dogen, because probably a number of you know that Dogen is supposed to have realized the emptiness of everything when he saw the smoke arising from the incense at his mother's funeral when he was 7. Yeah. So there's that same, you feel, I felt, yeah, he had similar sort of experiences of life to me, and even across that 700 years, particularly with his poetry as well, that kind of bonded us. So I was very introvert as a child, and I liked quiet, and there wasn't a lot of that around in our household. So I retreated into books, and I'd spend hours in my stepfather's little library where there were stories of the Boer War and Boy's Own Paper and Rover and all these books from the 30s and the early part of the century. And I read everything. And there were books on astronomy, and yeah, it was a wonderful space. You could just close the door and you'd be there for hours until my mother would come and say, "Michael, where have you been?" And two, Devon's talk last week reminded me when he talked about nightmares. In my teenage years, I had these nightmares constantly that I was not going to survive beyond the age of 21. And it was a really, really powerful feeling that I would not grow old. And I think at some stage my mother was a little bit concerned about this introversion. And so she sent me off to the local church, St. Gabriel's Church. She came the first couple of times and then didn't come anymore because she wasn't particularly religious. But St. Gabriel's proved to be a real place of solace for me. And I became a choir boy and then a server because it was very high Anglican. And there was all the drama, all the wonderful drama, the red cassocks, the lacy surplices, the incense, the bells, the passing of the Christian year, different stages, Easter with the church shrouded in purple. And I loved it. And so when I came to Zen, I thought, this is great. This is just like it used to be at St. Gabriel's, you know, with this ritual. And the other thing too that made an impression on me there was that it wasn't just ritual, but it had to be ritual, meticulous ritual. We were talking about that word meticulous, I think, last night. But Graham, who was the sacristan, the head of things, he was really it's really important to do things absolutely right. You know, aim for perfection. So that was really interesting, and I really did think of becoming a priest towards the end of that period when I was 18 or 19, and only drew back at the thought of celibacy. I couldn't handle the idea of a celibate life. Yeah, and I did have some, I don't know what you would call them, just one or two when we were on retreat at a convent in Crediton here in Devon. I was in the Mary Chapel there, and something happened which, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it was, but it was something, I don't know. I think Ingan used the term a few nights ago about the mother who had heard the bell ring in and thought she had met God. Well, I had a similar kind of experience in this convent, and it felt like Mary was very close. And then there were kind of years of drift away from religion into a kind of, I started reading philosophy and psychology, and I kind of drifted into a kind of agnostic period. And then in 1974, I was teaching in Kent, and the guy who was the art teacher there at the school said to me one evening, and this is at the time when yoga was, Howard Kent was producing the first yoga programs on telly. And he said, you know, I've heard about this thing called yoga. Would you come along with me? Because I'm getting this niggling arthritis in my hands, and it's really affecting my painting. And so I went along, not expecting to be enchanted or attracted at all. But the guy who was teaching us had been taught yoga in a Japanese concentration camp by a Chinese man. And John, this was the teacher, said it had saved his life. And I was hooked, absolutely. So then I was out of this very English kind of Christian religion, looking at Patanjali and the sutras, at breathing, at Bhagavad Gita, and a whole pantheon of Hindu philosophy. And so life went on. But really, I really feel that until I was about 35, I knew very, very little about the inner life, my inner life, the way that my inner life worked upon my outer life, or the way that I expressed that inner life in my outer life. And then I went on a humanistic psychology course for 2 years. And yeah, that really changed things. All the trauma around my dad's death, and the fact that my mother wouldn't talk about it, all that trauma really came out in that space. And it was, I feel, in some ways a real turning point in my life. And then in 1980, I was teaching in Wiltshire, was fed up with the job because it was like working in a lunatic asylum. And I got this offer from a British arms dealer to work in the Middle East. The name of that arms dealer is British Aerospace, all right? And they wanted teachers to teach Saudi Arabian Royal Air Force students. Now, a lot of my friends said, what are you doing? And because I've been in CND and all this in this stuff. But, you know, it was a classic case of me making excuses for myself. I needed to get out of this job I was in because it was crazy. The money was extraordinarily good. It was warm. I'd been working in Africa before. It was warm. And there was scuba diving with the Gulf of Bahrain on one side and the Red Sea on the other side. So I made up all these excuses to myself that I wouldn't be involved. How could I be involved with selling arms when I was just teaching kids English? Well, it's a long story that, but I found that levels of corruption reach far, far, far down in an organization. Although I must say that as employees, from a very practical point of view, we were treated very well. We lived life of luxury, in fact. Then one day we were traveling, we're going to travel up the coast, our tobacco club. And there was this big Texan in the club. And he was the kind of exactly what you think a Texan oilman is going to be. He was about 6'2" tall and just as wide. He was absolutely massive. And anyway, we were sorting out lifts, and he said to me, "Hey, Mike, would you like to take a lift with me up to Jubel?" And I didn't know him very well, but I thought, well, yeah, okay. So anyway, on the day appointed, I jumped into the car, and when we went up, and we were driving along a little way, and he said, "I hear you're a yoga teacher." And I said, "Yeah, I am." "And you do yoga lessons here?" "Yeah, I do." He said, "Well, would you like to hear this?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, what is it?" He said, "Well, just listen." So he stuck the tape in the tape machine, you know, and it was Thich Nhat Hanh on being peace. And so for 50 minutes going up the road to Jubel, I was listening to this wonderful tape by Thich Nhat Hanh on being peace. You know, it's the famous one where he shows his students a piece of paper and says, "Here, what do you see here?" I'm sure you all know that one. And anyway, we got up to Jubel and the tape stopped. And he turned to me, he said, "What do you think of that?" I said, "That was amazing." And we never talked about it after that. That was my first real contact with Buddhism. And so after that, I was of course, I had quite a bit of time to read in Saudi Arabia. How am I doing for time? 30 minutes. My God. How long can I go on for? Till 40? Okay. But anyway, when I left Saudi Arabia, I left Saudi Arabia. I went to live in southwest France in the Languedoc, where my yoga teacher, Bridget, who I learned yesterday, had died in June. I've been trying to, she was a true bodhisattva, was Bridget. She had found this beautiful valley called Val Dieu, which is exactly the Valley of God. And she had started a spiritual community there. So I went to join her. to live. And to make money, I was taking American tourists and anybody else who wanted to travel around the Languedoc, the Cathar castles. Some of you may know about the Cathars. They were very pioneering religious sect in 11th and 12th century Languedoc. And the King of France, along with the Pope, the Inquisition was founded to get rid of the Cathars, and they did. Over the space of about 130 years, they completely wiped them out. And I mean, we talk about the Holocaust in the last war, but this was a Holocaust too. But at Montsegur, which is one of the most beautiful places, a castle set high up on a ridge in the Languedoc, I had one of those amazing meetings that life sometimes gives us. I'd taken Lucy and her daughter up to Montsegur, and we met in a quite amazing way. You know, again, I hesitate to put words on it, but it was one of those, it seems to me, it has always seemed to me as if it had been intended for all time that we would meet in that way. And so instead of living in beautiful Val d'Eu, as I had intended to, I went back to live with Lucy in Sweden. And I'd been chasing around after Buddhist teachers in the Languedoc, but never actually got in touch with one. And also, one of the visitors came to me one evening and said, "Here, a friend gave me this book. I don't understand a word of it." She said, "I know you're interested in spiritual things. Maybe you would like it." And you can guess what the book was. It was Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And I mean, I spent a couple of days looking at this, and I came to the same conclusion as she did. I couldn't understand a word, or very little, let's say. And but one morning I woke up and the book was on my bedside table, and it was the edition with the picture of Suzuki. I don't know whether you can see that, can you? On the back. It's yeah, it's the one with Suzuki. Yeah, the book, the back of the book. Yeah. Oh wow. And it was a direct hit on me. I thought, wow, I've got it. At some stage in my life, I've got to meet this guy. Of course, it was too late, but it was a direct hit and somehow shaped my thinking, even though I didn't really understand what was in the book. So, hello. Oh. So I went to Sweden, and after I'd been there a couple of weeks, I was talking to this guy and told him about, I said, "Is there any Buddhism in the area?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "This guy, Jacques Dropsy, who is a Buddhist teacher, he comes here twice a year for a month." And yeah, he said, "You know, you can join in, you can meditate." And Jack had been in Korea for a number of years, and he was a physiotherapist and a Tai Chi master And when when you're sitting in a little bit of pain, and during a session or a long period of sitting, Jacques, he taught this professionally. He taught musicians professionally how to move properly and adjust their postures and their positions when they were playing. But Jacques could just touch you, and suddenly there was an amazing warmth, and yeah, he was an incredible teacher. But he'd pared down Zen to the very basics, because he understood that the Swedish population probably wouldn't deal very well with all the bells and whistles and stuff. So 2000, I went to Green Gulch for the practice period from February to April. That was led by Linda, and Fu was my teacher, and there was another woman, Wendy. And I met Reb, who had been up at Tassajara and came down to do the Sunday talk. So I'd heard about him, of course, but never met him. And then at this talk, a guy asked a question relating to a dispute he and his brother had over a big inheritance. And Reb was answering and trying to, I suppose, suggest forgiveness and tolerance and all these things. But this guy wasn't having any. It was his brother's fault. It was his brother's fault. He was the intolerant one. He was the one who was greedy. He was the one who was the capitalist. And Reb was dealing with all this great. And this conversation went on for about 15 minutes at least. And in the end, the guy got it. And I thought, that is incredible. You know, I have to see more of this guy, Reb. Yeah. And of course, Green Gulch was an amazing experience. And it was very difficult when I got back to Sweden and the reality. But I just want to read you something, a poem here, because I was in Cloud Hall at Green Gulch there. And one day I was going past the notice board and I saw this poem on the notice board. It was an Emily Dickinson poem, and an Emily Dickinson poem that I've always viewed as, and others too, as quite erotic. But I'd like to read it to you. Where is it? Yes, here it is. So, wild nights. Wild nights. Wild nights. Were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, the sea. Might I but moor tonight in thee. And I thought, that's amazing. Who has pinned up that such a wild poem on the notice board in this Buddhist place? So I was a bit taken aback and talked to other students and said, well, who put that up there? Because I was really, really curious. And then there was a catastrophe, 2002. Jacques, in true Zen teacher fashion, decided that he was not going to come to Sweden again. I mean, he had an enormous following in Sweden. and in fact, his physiotherapy methods were incorporated into the Swedish medical system. And there are lots and lots of Swedish physiotherapists this day that practice the Jack Dropsy method. And he just suddenly said, no, I've decided I'm not coming to Sweden again. He never gave any reason. True Zen teacher. So I thought, what is that about? How am I going to get my Zen practice now? Anyway, we moved to England in 2002, to South Devon. My parents had been very ill, and they needed a bit of care, or they needed care. And so I got into practice in Totnes, the Totnes Sangha, got into contact with the wider Sangha a bit later on, with Hebden, with setting up dancing mountains, with Devon in Glastonbury, with the wonderful Gaia house retreats, with Reb, a whole wonderful kind of golden period I felt at the time. That gave me so much joy and so much teaching at every level. It was, yeah. And of course went to Sweden, and there were other places like Felsentor. I never went to Felsentor. And then in 2011, with quite a bit of practice going on in Totnes, small community, perhaps half a dozen of us on a good day. And then Francis subsequently actually built a Zendo. So I think we are one of the few sanghas that actually has its own Zendo, which of course is not being used at the moment because I think Francis is away and the COVID and then Ingen came along in 2011, and all the wonderful things that have happened since then with Ingen supporting my practice. And yeah, I just want to end by, I should have mentioned my lay ordination with Reb in 2009, of course, at Gaia House, which was an important point along the way. And yeah, I want to say to you all and to Ingen, many thanks for this wonderful practice period, and I'm really looking forward to practicing with you all at Rohatsu in this dark midwinter. And I just want to read one little poem again by Eliot. Is everybody all right? Nobody going to sleep, or do you want a little bit more bedtime story? Yeah. Again, it's from the Four Quartets, and it's called Little Gidding. Little Gidding is a village in Cambridge where there was, in the 1700s, there was a religious community, a small religious community. And so suspended in time between pole and tropic, when the short day is brightest with frost and fire, the brief sun flames the ice on pond and ditches in windless cold that is the heart's heat. reflecting in a watery mirror a glare that is blindness in the early afternoon, and glow more intense than blaze of branch or brazier stirs the dumb spirit. No wind, but Pentecostal fire in the dark time of the year. Between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers. There is no earth smell or smell of living thing. It would be the same at the end of the journey if you came at night like a broken king. If you came by day not knowing what you came for, it would be the same when you leave the rough road and turn behind the pigsty to the dull facade and the tombstone. And what you thought you came for is only a shell, a husk of meaning, from which the purpose breaks only when it is fulfilled, if at all. Either you had no purpose, or the purpose is beyond the end you figured and is altered in fulfillment. There are other places which also are at the world's end, some at the sea jaws or over a dark lake, in a desert or a city. But this is the nearest in place and time, now and in England. Thank you all.